So, in this first lesson, we're going to talk a little bit about ways of reading in multiple data sets. Up till now, generally speaking, whenever we are reading in data sets from a reader, we are selecting a single data set to read, an individual file, an individual folder for folder-based formats like mapinfo tab and Esri shapefile, or perhaps a database connection. It is possible to read in multiple data sets, though. Now, a reason why you may want to do this is that you want to process multiple files and you want to treat them as a single data set. This is really common when working with various CAD formats like Autodesk DWG files or MicroStation files. Quite often, those files, those CAD drawings, are split into tiles so that you have multiple individual files that all cover a single area of interest. You may also end up working with tiles of data when working with rasters. Individual raster files can be very large, and they'll often be broken up into separate files. With FME, you can read in those multiple files and treat that as a single large data set. So there's a few ways that you can deal with multiple data sets. You can have multiple readers and multiple writers. This is more for a situation where the data itself is spread amongst multiple formats. Yesterday, we saw an example of that with our AutoCAD roads. We had a complete roads DWG file, but additional attributes were stored externally in an Excel spreadsheet. I've worked with many projects using cadastral data where the data is graphically stored within an AutoCAD file, but all of the attributes were stored in an external database. Those two different formats of data, when brought together, that was our complete data set. So you can bring in additional information using transformers like the database joiner or using something like the feature reader. We can also use integration transformers like the various connector transformers, which will retrieve data from a web-based location, and the HTTP caller. So I'm just trying to buy some time here for my lab to respond. And I've reached the end of that page. Just give my lab a moment here. Now, in a reader parameter, and let's see if I can get Workbench to actually open up here so I can demonstrate this. You can select multiple data sets to read by either using one of the options in the reader parameters or by using a comma separated list in the dataset parameter, indicating what it is you want to read. There. So in the readers, here I'm reading from a zip file that's on a web page, but in the drop down here, I also have the option of selecting multiple folders or files of data. When I click on that, it brings up this interface here. I can actually have multiple entries in this list. I can tell it to read in individual data sets. I can also tell it to check through subfolders as well. That's not the greatest format to show this in, so I'm going to bring in a shapefile reader. So here I can select multiple folders or files. This is especially helpful with Esri shapefiles because quite often your actual data set is an entire folder. So I can add individual files and then go select the files that I want. Say here I can go to FME data, data, and I believe I had this in transportation. So this has multiple shapefiles. I can select all of those individually and it'll show up here. Notice the way this is laid out is that I have a folder and then I have a filter or file. So these are going to read in these three files. If I hit OK, in this list here, you'll see that it's just a comma separated list. So this interface is really just creating that comma separated list. If I go back into that folder selection dialog here, if I know I want to read in all the bike paths, I can simplify this and make it more dynamic as additional bike path files are added. If I double click on this, I can edit it. And I can put in a wildcard. And I can remove those and hit OK. And what this will do is read in anything which has bike paths as the start of the file name. You're not limited to just these, the star. This is using something called glob programming. So on Wikipedia here, it goes through how glob programming works. It's kind of like regular expressions, but not quite. So there are a couple of wildcards you can use, question marks, stars, you can use range sets, things like that. So there is quite a bit of flexibility there. So you can choose, say, a high-level folder and have it look through that folder for specific files that match this and treat all of that as a single data set. You can also tell it to go through subfolders as well. And all that's doing is adding two stars together as part of the folder path. So now this will go into cycling, go through all subfolders of cycling, and look for all bike paths that, well, all files that start with bike paths, and read all of that in as a single data set. So that reads everything in as a single large data set, bringing all of that together. There is another reader that you may want to consider if you're dealing with multiple data sets. And that is, let's see, I can bring all those in. Realistically, if I was doing this, I'd want to bring all of this in as a single merged feature type, also with bike paths star. And then I know that I have all of my bike paths coming in through this single feature type, even though in the back end, this is spread amongst multiple tiles of data. Now, if you're in a situation where you have these tiles of data and you are processing all of them, in this example, I'm bringing all of that together and processing it all at once in one translation. But this could be a huge amount of data. If you've already got the tiles of data, that may be because it's too much data and you want to process each tile individually. So, how can we do that? There's a few ways of tackling that. One of them is to do this as a batch process and start up the workspace, start up a separate workspace run for each individual file. There's a number of ways of handling that. Ultimately, we could use a actual DOS batch file with a for in do loop. But nowadays, with FME, if you're doing large processing processes like that, you'd probably want to be pushing that into FME flow. So what I could do instead here is use a path. Well, I always call it a path reader, but it's actually the directory and file path names reader. I would give it basically the same sort of instruction. Look for a folder. Let's start with cycling and tell it to read in all the files that match a certain query. So tell it to look through, find all of the shape files. And what this reader will do is create a feature for each individual file. That feature will contain the path name to that file. I can then, so go through that, check the subfolders as well. In the parameters here, I can tell it what kind of files to look for. The path filter is star.shp or bytepaths.shp if I wanted to get really precise. And I'll hit OK. So this will create a single feature. At this point, I can either add in a workspace runner to run a specific workspace. So this is a 2 workspace solution. I have the workspace, which is processing the byte paths. So I'd have this one here. And then if I want to run this one individual workspace for each tile of data, I could then run that into a workspace runner. The other option is the FME, I was about to say server job submitter, FME flow job submitter. So what this will do is actually submit a job to FME flow. So this way you can give it an entire folder of data and then pass it the individual files to be translated. And then on FME flow, that'll all just go into the queue. And if you have, say, 10 engines for your FME flow installation, it'll be doing 10 processes concurrently to work through all of your data. Okay. So that is reading and writing multiple data sets. So please review reading and writing multiple data sets, and we'll continue at 9:32. And there were some questions in there about recordings. I don't think we have recordings attached just yet at the top of these lessons. We will be attaching those in the near future, I want to say. So when we have recordings available, you will be able to find them in the individual lessons themselves at the top of the lesson page. For the link to sign out a machine from yesterday's lab, I see that Sam has put a link in there already. And I think that's all the questions for the moment. So good luck, everyone. I'll see you in about 5 minutes.